Well, good afternoon. I'm Yvonne Garcia, and I am the chair of the Chamber Women's Network Advisory Board. I'm also the chief of staff to the chairman and CEO of State Street and global head of communications. It's great. It's a privilege to be here with all of you, especially with the speaker that we have lined up for you today. And while everything remains virtual, we at the Women's Network are more committed than ever to ensuring that women across all industries and career levels remain connected, and that we continue to strengthen our professional networks and engage you with the greater Boston community. I'd like to take a moment to welcome anyone who may be new to the Chamber, whether a member or a board member. In fact, I'd like to share a great success milestone that we've achieved at the board level. We're proud to report that we have achieved 25% racial diversity on our advisory board. If many of you who attended the Pinnacle Award may recall that I had announced our commitment to increasing diversity at the board. And at that point in time, we were at 11%. And really happy to share with you that we have brought on a phenomenal group of advisory board members from different walks of life, and who just will be able to enrich us with greater perspective and complete a perfect group of women leaders who share the common mission and come from different experiences and allow us to have fuller and richer conversations as we try to continue to grow in our professional and personal journey. I do encourage you to join us in today's discussion on social media. For those of you who may be new, we love to share our stories and trend so that others can benefit from the great program that you'll experience today. So it's hashtag BossBizWomen and at Boston Chamber. There's also a Q&A chat feature. We'd love for you to enter your questions as our speakers go throughout the day, throughout our program. Anything you'd like to ask them, please feel free to insert your question in that feature. And also the program will be recorded. So in the future, you can direct people to our YouTube page and they'll be able to view the recording there. During a time in the world where we're facing both the largest health pandemic and movement for equity that we have seen in our lifetimes, it seems only fitting to hear from one of the newest innovative leaders in our community. As the proud mom of a Simmons University freshman, I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest speaker, Dr. Lynn Perry Wooten, the new president of Simmons University. And moderating the discussion, we have the privilege of my good friend, Elisa Van Dam, who's the Vice President of Allyship and Inclusion at Simmons University Institute for Inclusive Leadership and a fellow member of the Women's Network Advisory Board. Dr. Wooten will share with us her goals and priorities for leading the next generation of students into the future and her expertise on how to lead through crisis. And with that, I'd like to give a big thank you to our longtime Women's Network sponsor, PwC. We appreciate their support and partnership for bringing this content and platform to all of you today and in the coming months. I'd like to welcome Allison Simonetta. She's the Director of Strategy and Health Advisory at PwC and a Simmons alumna to introduce our guest speaker. Allison, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Yvonne. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm particularly excited about today's session because as an alum of Simmons, I firmly believe that my education, the network, the relationships, and the confidence that I gained during my MBA program led me here today. So on behalf of PwC, it's my honor to introduce today's guest speakers, Dr. Lynn Perry Wooten and Elisa Van Dam. Dr. Lynn Perry Wooten is the 9th president of Simmons and the first African-American to lead the prestigious university. She's an innovative leader who specializes in crisis leadership, diversity and inclusion, and positive leadership during a time when we are facing the largest health pandemic and movement for equality that we have seen in our lifetimes. Dr. Wooten is a distinguished author who has written about leading under pressure in the face of crisis and societal diversity and inclusion dynamics, using her research to drive her work both in education and as an administrator. Prior to joining Simmons, she worked for Cornell University as the David J. Nolan Dean and Professor of Management and Organization at the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management. Dr. Wooten, thank you so much for joining us today, and we welcome you to our Women's Network community. Moderating today's discussion is Elisa Van Dam, Vice President of Allyship and Inclusion for the Institute for Inclusive Leadership at Simmons University. Her focus is on developing the mindset and skills of leaders at all stages of life so they can foster gender parity and cultures of inclusion, with a particular interest in those working to identify as men to act as allies for gender equity. Outside of Simmons, Elisa coaches women on successfully navigating maternity leave. As a member of the Simmons team, an active member of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, and a Women's Network Advisory Board member, Elisa brings great insight to today's discussion. She is a leader herself and an advocate for inclusive leadership. Her work offers us a valuable perspective as we dive into the goals for guiding the next generation of Simmons students into the future. Elisa, we thank you for being here today. And with that, I turn it over to you.
Allison, thank you so much. That was lovely. And we always love to hear from our Simmons alumni. So thank you for sharing your experience as well. President Wooten, I am so thrilled to have the chance to talk with you today. And I wanted to start by asking you, what brought you to Boston and what made you choose Simmons?
So that's two good questions. I have always known about the great things that Simmons has done throughout my career. In the world of business, where my academic home is, it's been a trailblazer in educating women for business. And when the search firm called, I was really motivated by the mission of Simmons University, starting with John Simmons to create a women institution that really makes sure that women have independence and financial empowerment. The academic in me has also always appreciated universities that bridge the liberal arts and the professional education. So at Simmons, we have things such as nursing and library science and business and communications, but we also ensure that people are grounded in a language and the arts and the natural sciences and develop that mindset to thrive in the world. The other thing, Alicia, that we have passion about that drove me from Simmons is every day I get to have a job where I think about developing leaders. And that is something that Simmons has done throughout its history, and that's been part of my lifelong work. The second part of your question, you asked me why Boston, and I often get that question. So I have spent the majority of my adult life in college towns, or in towns similar to Boston where eds and meds grew the industry. And someone said to me yesterday, you got to moved to the biggest, best city that does education. So this is like a large college town. And so there's so many things that drove me to Boston. One, it's commitment to higher education, diversity, the community, the arts, and the thriving businesses in Boston.
Thank you. You know, you came to Boston in a really strange and unusual time that seems to fit so well with the work that you've done over your lifetime around crisis management. And we're so fortunate to be able to benefit from that. You literally wrote the book. And so what I'm wondering is, as you've been now dealing with all of the things that are going on around you, what are you learning about crisis management and what can you share with us?
You're right. I came to Boston during a unique time. I officially accepted the job and was voted in by the Board of Trustees on February the 6th. I came back to Boston for one more kind of trip to get to know campus. My next house hunting trip is when universities were starting to shut down. And between that trip around March 15th and July 1, I didn't come back to Boston. So I moved here without even seeing where I was going to live. I have never had a day where, you know, I can officially work on campus because we've been in a pandemic and the campus is quasi. But as you said, Elisa, I've spent 25 years studying crisis leadership and never thought that I would get it to put it in action the way I have, with this notion of a pandemic and a social reckoning. My research on crisis leadership wanted to take it to another level when my co-author and I, Dean James, started it 25 years ago. The core of crisis leadership was about communication. And we truly believe that communicate is very important. And I think all of us have seen that in the 6 months. But we wanted to shift the paradigm to what are the actions needed before, during, and after a crisis. And how do you ensure that an organization not only survives the crisis, but comes out thriving? and becomes a better organization, similar to the Chinese proverb that says every crisis is an opportunity. So what I've been working with in the Simmons team, one is understanding how the world's changing. Higher ed's changing, the way we work's changing, the way we live is changing. Developing systems and platforms and policies that we can all thrive during this pandemic era. So we've been thinking a lot about that and scanning the environment, understanding, making sense of our internal operations at Simmons, but what's happening in the world. Ensuring we're building trust. As we've all seen on the news in a crisis situation, you have to build trust. And a lot of what we have done to build trust is really managing our various constituent groups to ensure that they have the things that they need in a crisis situation. So parents, students, faculty, staff, and the greater Boston community. And then coming out of the crisis, we've been thinking about what are the opportunities? How's the world of technology is changing? How are we going to educate our students differently, as I said? And the most important construct of my research is learning before, during, and after a crisis. So we've been engaging in a lot of virtual learning at the individual level, the team level, and the university level.
Clearly, we have much to learn from this crisis. And I'm wondering what advice you have for the folks in the audience around how they can use this as an opportunity to grow, to broaden.
Yeah, you know, if I'm a leader of a team or organization of a unit, I'm asking myself, how can I use this crisis as an opportunity? The first thing is you have to sense make of what's happening in your world, and environmental scans are so important. So I'm encouraging all the leaders that I work with, understanding the industry dynamics, what's happening now and what's going to look different. Knowing the macro environment, a quick checklist I do for the macro environment is like a PES plus G. What's happening politically? What's the economy going to look like and how that's going to impact my industry? What are the socio-culture trends? And embedded in the socio-culture trends come to demographic changes. And then the T is technology, how technology, you know, we're doing this presentation virtual today. And finally, what's happening in the global environment and looking at. The other part of coming out good is you have to do multiple scenario plannings. At Simmons right now, we're planning for the spring term and running multiple scenarios. We're looking at scenarios, for example, of what would campus look like if we continue fully online, and what would campus look like if we brought students back. So scenario planning is important. Let's think about the scenarios and the implications. This particular crisis also has brought to our attention equity. And a lot of what we're focusing on is that we can no longer put the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion aside. Now is the time to bring them to the forefront of the stage. And each leader, hopefully on this meeting today, is asking in their organization those tough questions and how I can use this 2020 to elevate issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. I think we are seeing so much more around how people can take action around equity and all kinds of issues around justice. And so as you think about your work within Simmons, what have you put into place? And again, what advice do you have for the folks who might be on the call?
So as by now you can see, I'm a pretty systematic and strategic person. And so the way I approach the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion have kind of this other paradigm, and I call it the ABCs. Every leader has an organization or unit that they're in charge of. And this A is for really assessing. You have to know your organization, the demographics of your organization. Where are there gaps missing? I heard the Chamber of Commerce just say that they were able to increase their board for people of color. Who doesn't have a voice in that A for assessment? Who are the under-resourced people and the people from underrepresented backgrounds? So for example, at Simmons, we have a very diverse freshman class. Half of our class is approaching first gen and women of color. I've been thinking about is that part of the assessment. How do we create learning environments where those students can succeed? So assessment really is knowing the demographics from your board to your team to all the constituents you serve. For example, another project that we're starting to begin for assessment is looking at our vendors to ensure we have diverse vendors and that we're walking the talk and that our partner organizations, the companies that we work with, represent the diversity and social justice practice that we're seeing. So during that assessment, that audit, the B is you got to build bridges. You can't do this diversity, equity, and inclusion work alone. So you have to ask, what do I want to accomplish? What are the bridges that I want to build? At Simmons, I'm approaching this from what do we need to learn as an organization to be better at it? So all the learning investments we need to make. What programs and products and services do we need to do? So one example is we went online. We know that there is a technology gap for students. So with our 2U partner, we were able to get a grant to ensure that all of our students had access to laptops and Wi-Fi. That was a gap that we worked with a partner really to build the bridge for that inequity. At least I know you're coaching things. I've been thinking about inequities in this pandemic of how do we have women who are at home trying to school children? I see you shaking your heads and cooking dinner. I mean, I just had people here working on the condo before the webinar, balancing all those things. Some people may have elder care. So looking at caretaking responsibilities are another example I think of that's going to be really big for equity. So building these bridges and then C is cultivating capabilities. You can't do this work well if you don't invest in the capabilities that you need. It might be marketing capabilities or HR capabilities or how you manage your operations. At Simmons, it's a lot of things. We need great academic advisors. We need to support our women and professors who have caring responsibilities. We need to ensure that we have a healthy workplace, our first-gen students. The other thing that I emphasize a lot about cultivating capabilities, you have to have a scorecard. Goal setting and knowing what you want to accomplish. If you don't measure it, it doesn't get managed.
I love the clarity and the specificity of that advice. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'd love to kind of take a little bit of a turn and ask you about something that you mentioned, which is your desire to both personally and to help our students and other stakeholders lead a meaningful and integrated life. Can you talk about that a little bit?
You know, when I think about my life work and my vocational calling, it's definitely been in universities. I came to a university in 1984 as a freshman, and I've never left college. But really, it's about how do you train the next generation and my peers to live an integrative life. When you go to college, especially when you're a woman, people spend a lot of time helping you prepare for your career. You might be an accounting or an engineer or an event planner or a nurse. But people don't say that, you know, there's a work outside of work and you have to live an integrated life. And I think about living an integrative life is the first path is helping people define a career they find rewarding. I saw a statistic that, you know, in your lifetime, you're going to spend 90,000 hours at work, or 1/3 of your time. So you have to be intentional about a career. The next thing is that life is not a solo journey. So really helping women in particular, thinking about how do I balance my work life? Whether you be single or married or have elder care responsibilities, how do you balance your work life to ensure that you are accomplishing your goals? For me, the third bucket that's really been important is wherever I lived, I wanted to be part of the community. And so engaging in the community, civically, through organizations such as the Chamber and Junior League and the Links and other organizations that I belong to, I've always wanted to belong to my community because just being in community is one of my values, but give back to my community. So part of living an integrative life is who's your village, who's your community? And how do you want to serve that community? How do you want to live in that community? And then, you know, the fourth bucket you can speak to too is I don't think women take enough time for self-care. It really is managing your physical health, your mental health, and your spiritual health. Everybody has their favorite self-care practices. I love naps. I was just sharing, I met with young students yesterday because I like naps, so that's one of mine. Healthy eating is mine. I need to exercise more. Also, reading is very important to me. And, you know, in some ways, shopping is a self-care for me, but yes. So self-care is important about living this integrative life and making time for it. Similar to what gets measured gets managed. When I'm coaching a young woman, I look at their calendar. You probably do the same thing. And if living this integrative life is important, are you setting personal goals, professional goals, and community goals every year? And when I look at your calendar, do I see that you're doing that?
Yeah, I love that as a person who lives and dies by my calendar. And also, I love a nap. And I will say that having a bed next to my desk has made napping really, let's say, attractive many times.
So you are the quintessential person of living the integrative life. You got
like
your bed in there,
so.
right there.
It's right there, exactly. You moved to Boston at a time when you couldn't even visit. You moved into your condo more or less sight unseen. So this whole idea of work-life integration, that must be really top of mind for you right now. Aside from the self-care, which is so important, what other things were you thinking about as you were making this transition, and how do you manage all of that?
Yeah, it was a complicated transition for me. I'm in a commuter marriage where my husband's based in Ann Arbor. I have a child that just started Brown University, and I had a child that graduated from law school who's moving to the Bay Area. So I was literally coordinating 4 different moves. But what I was thinking about for me is about living this integrative life is that, one, I wanted to ensure that I could hit the ground running in the virtual community for Simmons. So getting to know the Simmons community, the ethos and the goal settings, and ensuring that we were doing the best things during the pandemic. So that was important. And then virtually trying to get to know the Boston community, because it's really strange, as you say, to move in a community and not to experience it. So a lot of my time has been virtual introductions, meeting leaders in the Boston community and people and civics groups, and thinking about what my Boston personal board of directors is going to look like, and my Simmons personal board of directors, and how I can start getting involved in the community. My daughter and I have also been trying to, when we get out, walk and sample the community. And then on the virtual thing, we've been experiencing the museums and having different restaurants delivered to our house so we can get to know the community. But I am so optimistic and looking for spring or summer next year when I can be really out and about and get to know the community.
Well, and events like this are hopefully part of you building that community, as we also encourage everyone on the call to think about this network and how do you access it when you can't go to a hotel and have breakfast and sit down next to somebody. So I really appreciate the chamber making this possible. I'm also going to take a quick commercial break to remind everybody that we will open up for Q&A shortly, and there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please do put some questions in there, and that way we can get the conversation more broad. I am wondering, one of the questions that we often ask speakers at the Women's Network Breakfast is, can you think of a time when you ran up against an obstacle or something really didn't go the way that you had planned, and how did you overcome that situation?
You know, I can think of 2 examples, one earlier in my career and one later in my career. This goes back again to when you're starting your career and you did it the way I do, it can be challenging to live an integrative life. And as I was telling you, in a 2-year time period, I got married, had a baby, wrote a dissertation, and started a new job. And that's, that is a lot on a person. And the obstacle of balancing all of those things, and really when you want to focus on launching your career. And so that was the obstacle. And so I start with this notion of, I started in Gainesville, Florida. I had to get to know a new community. And some of the same things that I'm trying to do in Boston, but I got to do in person. I reached out to the community so I could use the community as a resource to help me navigate that. The second thing I can say is that I've always been blessed with good childcare. So even though this was an obstacle time, I spent time being very intentional about finding good childcare, and people just stepped up and helped me, because I think people just felt sorry for me. But the biggest obstacle in academia, being an assistant professor is hard. And often women, but especially women of color, don't have as many mentors and resources. I mean, it's a complicated process to learn how to write a journal article, to revise and resubmit it, to get it through the publication process. and also be excellent in your career. And what I had to do is make sure, once I realized the complexity of it, have a constellation of mentors at all levels help me to overcome that really kind of obstacle of starting as an assistant professor and getting my career. So I built a constellation of mentors. And really, one of the blessings of my career is, one, I had a good life partner, but two, also I've had a co-author that I've had for 25 years. And we were able to develop a system to build a whole research program together.
Mentoring is so important, and we talk a lot about what it can do for you and how do you kind of position yourself for mentoring. Do you have any advice though on, or experience on, how you created that constellation of mentors?
One is, even if you're an introvert at this meeting today, and now you can be an introvert and get it, you have to think about, you're an introvert? You have to think about multiple sources of mentoring. And I'll tell you multiple stories. My mentors are diverse, so they span ages, races, diverse gender orientations throughout locations. So I definitely have diverse mentors. That's important. I have some people where we do in-person mentoring sessions, and some people where I've never met in life and virtual. And one of the people that I consider a mentor, for example, is a Simmons alum. Her name is Deborah Britton. And Deborah was the first African-American president of Junior League. I was in the Ann Arbor chapter of Junior League. I had read about Deborah. And what I did is that my Junior League president said, "Oh, I'm good friends with Deborah. I will connect you with her." And so this was 16 years ago, just by me telling someone that I wanted that mentor. She made the connection, and Deborah Britton, who's a Simmons alum, ironically, has been my mentor since then. So it's being open. In the world of social media now, there are doors. So using LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, people are open. The other thing I tell young women is mentoring is a two-way street. You can't always be a giver. You have to be a taker too. So you have to be both. You have to give to the relationship, and you have to see what you want. But making sure that you give is important. And then remembering that I have some mentors I may not talk to in a couple of years, and some I talk to weekly. So thinking about the temporal relationship of mentoring is important too. And there are different roles. I believe that you need a mentor, a sponsor, and a coach. And you probably agree with that. The mentor is, as Carla Harris says, is the person who really loves the good, the bad, and the ugly. The sponsor is someone you want to have where you're showing the good, because when you're not in the room or when you're talking to people, they're elevating you. And then the coach is the person who's going to help you make those stretch goals. So thinking about that is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. To have people in those roles. And sometimes you don't even know that someone is sponsoring you. It's happening, but if you are positioning yourself and doing your best and making that visible, then you're kind of lending yourself to that sponsorship position.
And adding upon that is what makes sponsorship work for the people I've seen is a lot of times you don't know who's sponsoring you. So you have to constantly know what your career brand is projecting to the world, and how people see you on social media and personal interactions, and what your resume says about you. So personal branding is important also.
So true. How do you think about building your personal brand, or what your personal brand should even be?
It goes back to how you want to design your life, and in particular your careers. Of course, at Simmons, I believe your personal brand starts with your education. So thinking about education inside and outside the classroom are important. And then as you go along your career, what experiences do you want to have? That you want to make sure that you can say, this is part of my personal brand. One of the experiences that I'm excited about is that I was funded through a National Institute of Health grant to look at healthcare disparities for maternal healthcare, because I wanted to be in the world of healthcare and bring my organizational theory research to healthcare. So that's something that was an experience that I have. Part of making sure you have that experience is saying yes sometimes to opportunities. Women tend to say no. We know that a man will take a job and he only thinks he can do half of it, but women want that confidence. They want to feel like they can do 90%. So saying yes, and then thinking about how I can build it. And then when you're looking at your brand also, so there's education, there's experience and expertise. But when you're not in the room, what are people saying about your execution capability? Can you get the job done? Can you deliver?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I am sure we have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to just quickly open up my Q&A question here. All right, so here's an attendee who is very appreciative of the advice that you've been sharing and wanting to build on that to ask you what advice you have for those who are hoping to advance careers while working remotely. What skills should they be developing and ensure visibility in this remote environment?
That is a great question. In a remote environment, it's all about how you are leveraging technology to build your brand. So one, make sure that you're constantly having your LinkedIn profile updated. Two, in your day-to-day work, I say make sure you're showing up. Be prepared for those Zoom meetings, be present, think about how you can contribute the meeting. And I have one colleague at HBS who says when you show up to a meeting, you want to, one, make sure that your comments advance the learning for yourself in the group. So make sure you have good comments there. The other thing is it takes more energy to manage relationships in this virtual world. So thinking about your best pathways, how do I shoot someone an email to see how they're doing? Do I use a text message? Do I drop something in the regular traditional mail? But spending that time to check in on people in your networks and your engagement. The one thing I have to say about the pandemic is there's so many learning opportunities that are free now. It's also a great time to look at your skill set and Google how you can upgrade your skills and develop another competency during the pandemic with the time you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people, some people have the experience of having more time because they're not commuting, and others, their time is just completely overrun with all of the responsibilities that they now have all inside of our houses. So I think still finding ways to take advantage of learning is a really good way to stay visible.
And thinking about, as you say, Elisa, the new things that you've learned and making sure you're communicating, because we've all learned new things in the last 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that actually ties into this next question, which is around women dropping out of the workforce due to caretaking right now. And so they're wondering, how are we preparing our women students as they enter the workforce? And are we reaching out to businesses to discuss what they can do to support the workforce?
You know, that's a good question. I'm raising a young daughter who is very much a advocate for gender equity and thinking about the pay gap we see in the workforce. You know, thinking about that white women make 80% on the dollar, women of color is somewhere around 50 or 60% of the dollar. And some of that is from when women drop out of work. And women have a tendency to drop out through various parts of the pipeline. So for example, at Simmons, and you can comment on this too, we're thinking about various parts of the pipeline where women drop out and then how we can decrease the equity gap. So one of the examples I'm very excited about is women tend to drop out of college more. Is we've just launched a degree completion program. So that for women who dropped out of college and undergrad, there's an efficient and effective way to support their learning journey. Once you start to get into caring responsibilities in other parts of the career, through the Inclusive Leadership Institute, we've been thinking about how do corporations own this and realize that women will come in and out of the workforce, and what skills can we give to women as they take a sabbatical from the workforce and to ensure that they can enter and be successful again. So this is really something big on my mind. And it goes back to my point that young women, we have to educate them to think about their career over a life course. Not just that I'm going to get the Simmons degree or this Emerson College degree or something, but my life course about when and where I'm going to enter education in the work. And so our plan class, which is part of our curriculum at Simmons, we do a lot of career coaching to get our students to do that. And then the work that you're doing at the Institute, women who are in the field, we're doing work to get them to do that. But a lot of people don't spend that time. And, you know, I know your specialty is maternity leave. I mean, I was very intentional about how long I was going to take, when I was going to enter, and how I was, and, you know, and things that took a pause. Sometimes I knew it was going to take a pause. I remember when my oldest was in middle school, in high school, that took a lot of energy. And I wanted to be there for my children. So then things took a pause for a while.
Yeah, I think it's so true. And like all of these things, it's a partnership between women as we think about our careers and our organizations as they support us. So I think about women who right now just simply don't have the ability to do the full-time job and all of the responsibilities. And we are finding still fall disproportionately on women, even in a dual parent household. So how can women see that as like a temporary situation versus now I must drop out of the workforce and completely disengage? Do you have thoughts about navigating that?
Yeah, I think that to see it as a temporary situation means that you're in constant planning mode, and you have to have the skill set to think long term. Okay, I'm going to make it through potty training, and I'm going to make it to kindergarten and those type of things. And where you can give your time to work versus your caring responsibilities. The other two big things are who are going to be your allies as you're in it, working in and out of the workforce. Who are your allies? Who are your partners? It could be your life mate. It might be your family or your extended village. It might be relatives. And then thinking about what you can take off your plate. So often as women, we're always adding things to our plate, but there's some things about what can you take off your plate or what can you do more efficient? I'm always looking for ways to do things more efficient. I'm kind of obsessed with, there was a time where, I was the person who everything cooked dinner all on Sunday, so I didn't have to cook during the week. So what can you do more efficient? You heard me talk about it. Now I'm obsessed with Instacart because that's saving me 2 hours a week from going to the grocery store. There are lots of different cost-efficient efficiency ways, and sometimes women don't think about that.
Yeah, it's so true. For folks who haven't read Tiffany Dufu's Drop the Ball, that is such a good reference for what stuff can you just decide we're not doing right now.
And you have to be honest with yourself, and sometimes it's painful. I like to cook, but when my second child was born, I decided that I wasn't baking anything for the schools anymore. I was only going to give my home bake energy to my family. And when I'm guilty, and when the schools needed something, I would donate money or buy it. And so knowing where you feel it's acceptable to drop the ball.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was coaching someone and she said something that I think is so true. It's not that it's hard to say no to things you don't want to do. That is hard. And it's something we need to practice. But the really hard thing is to say no to stuff you want to do. Because if you add up all of the things that you want to do, you can't do all of them. And so how do you kind of prioritize and say no to stuff that you really wish that you could do? And I'm curious, have you thought about that? And is that something that you practice?
Yeah, that is definitely something that I practice. So the things that I really wanted to do being an academic is I wanted to be there for my kids at the homework table, right? So managing the homework and the academic experience were very important to me. But there were other things like, I was always there for the big sports events and the big dance things, but I couldn't get there for every practice. And I realized that, you make sacrifices in your life and you have to do trade-offs. And so the things that I wanted to do, I always made sure I did. Going back again to when my kids were in middle school, for example, it was very big. They had intense final exams in their middle school where I would black off my calendar that week so I could be there to give them the support they need. So it's balancing, whereas I didn't make the cookies or those type of things. And I had lots of partners. This is why wherever I live, the community that I have selected to live in has been so important with me. And so my children will joke that they've had a string of teenage babysitters that are grown with their own kids now that enrich their lives. So I had lots of partners that helped me with that.
Okay, I'm checking the time. Ooh, we're good. So let me look and see what other questions we have here. All right, so everyone is talking about how the pandemic is making it harder for women. I see businesses and organizations really trying to make an effort with things like flex hours, but I am crazier than ever. And then I need to find time to do the work, take care of my family, do self-care. How can we take this pressure off? Is there anything that you would add besides you have to say no to stuff that you want to do and that thing should not be self-care?
You have to say no, and it's all about managing your calendar. I'm often getting on my friends about managing the calendar, and even my team has gotten on me about managing my calendar. and managing my energy. So I know that my best thought work is done in the morning. So I try to block off time in the morning for my writing, my thought work. I know that I need to eat lunch. And so I try to block off that middle time and spend time there. And then thinking about the end of the day. So prioritizing what's important, as we said, and managing your calendar. And you're going to drop some balls. You know, there was a personal ball that came that I dropped today. And I just said to myself, Lynn, give yourself the grace. I can only do what I can do. And I need it for self-care.
Yeah. All right. Hard right turn to ask this question. Part of Simmons Strategy 2022 is to foster a diverse, welcoming, and inclusive community. In what ways are you driving this strategy as the president of Simmons?
Yeah, definitely. And, to be one of the most inclusive universities in New England. Well, first, I'm thinking about the culture and creating this culture of inclusion where everybody feels their voice is heard, where they get to show up and really bring their strengths to the workplace to contribute to the mission of Simmons. So the culture, and asking people for honest feedback about what we need to do to be more inclusive with the culture, especially voices that may not have gotten heard. So the next thing I'm doing is asking people to really embrace the principle of everyday leadership. I was not raised that leadership is hierarchical. I was not raised that leaders are born. I was raised that you learn leadership and that everybody is a leader, no matter what role you're in. And if we truly embrace that in principle, I think people are included. I am trying to make sure that I hear the voices of people who have been marginalized or from under-resourced backgrounds and developing programs for those people. And so I've spent a lot of time reaching out to diverse religious groups, people from diverse ethnic backgrounds, people at the lower level of the organization, first gen. I'm thinking about, to do this work, how hard the learning is, and we have to learn in a variety of ways. So our community reads have been one vehicle. We had read a book about the Flint water crisis, What the Eyes Don't See, and we just had that author in. For our spring read, we're doing how to be an anti-racist. So having those conversations are important. We're starting to think about, how do you have, in a civilized manner, those courageous conversations? And I think the most important talk for all of us is that we have to be examples. I'm just trying to be an example of inclusive leadership and ensure that other people are modeling those examples. But it is about making sure voices are heard and that people are brought to the table, whether it be alumni or our vendors or our students or our faculty and staff. And it's a journey work. America didn't get to this point in one day. And so I'm asking for grace and the time and the patience. As my colleague Gary said, we have to be impatient, but realize we need patience too. This sense of urgency, but it's going to take time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to pivot slightly and ask this question. What's at the top of your wish list of things that you would want to change at Simmons?
So we're definitely striving for some of the questions, some of the things that you said. And so one is, I want us to move up the trajectory and continue to be a great place to work. And that's going to require all the things that we talked about. I want Simmons to really be known for all the great things it's doing. So my wish list is really thinking about where we are strategically positioned in higher education and how the world knows. And I believe that Simmons' distinction really is that it's a great place to get a grad and undergraduate education that's going to prepare you for your life work of everyday leadership. And that's what I want it to be known for, and attract students who are interested in that and people who want to work in that. And so someone in Los Angeles, California, and Tokyo, Japan, and Chicago, Illinois are all saying, I want to learn and work at Simmons. That's what's on the top of my list of things to do. And everybody's talking about, Simmons is the place to be.
Well, Simmons has been a wonderful place for me to be for the last 13 years. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to continue to work in that vision. So thank you. I am going to turn to a question that we got about career change, and in particular, someone who's thinking about making a pivot into something around diversity, inclusion, and equity. Do you have any advice about that?
You know, I would definitely get mentors of people who have the job not only the job you want to pivot to, but the next level of job to see what you can learn from them. I would do an honest assessment of my current competencies and how they translate into a DEI position. And then where there are gaps, I would invest in training, certificate, and coaching so I position myself. But once again, it's all about that brand and then giving yourself the confidence that you can make that pivot and communicate that in an interview process.
Absolutely. And if you had to kind of off the top of your head say, what are the key competencies that you would want to see in someone looking for a DE&I role, what would you be looking for?
Someone who understands the various forms of diversity. You've heard me talk about diversity very broadly. A person who's thinking about cultural transformation and what they want the culture to look like, and then how they're going to kind of really make the pathway for that cultural transformation. And then someone who is able to have the courageous conversations, because this work is hard, and realize that the cultural transformation, the courageous conversations, requires a leader who can shepherd organizational learning.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm looking at the clock and I think we have time for one or two more questions, so don't hesitate to put those in the chat if you still have some. This one is about women gaining ground slowly as college and university presidents. And she's wondering, or he or they, have you connected with fellow higher ed leaders since becoming president? And are they part of your personal board of directors?
They are definitely part of my personal board of directors. And because I've been in academia all my life, probably heavily weighed. So one thing is I can say the majority of the presidents in the greater Boston area have welcomed me, and I have definitely connected with them. And then all throughout my career, I've had people in the presidency or provost role that have mentored me. So I'm still connected with my mentor, the president of Cornell University. And then I have constituents across the country. Presidents are kind of a pretty tight-knit club where we'll email, we'll text each other. Are you opening in the spring? What's your enrollment looking like? What's your best practices for social justice and diversity? It's a very collaborative industry. My Michigan colleague who's passed, C.K. Parlod, said, you know, you have to learn how to collaborate with your competitors. And higher education is something that we've done that. So I can say my president's kind of board of directors have been very supportive of me. And there's probably 3 or 4 times a week I'm talking to another university president. Here in the state of Massachusetts, the college presidents throughout the state, we get together pretty frequently for a meeting to support each other. I also meet with the presidents for the College of the Fenways.
Wow, that's really nice to hear. I don't think many of us were aware of that. I wasn't.
It goes back to what you said, though, all of those particular networks, and higher ed is a very networked industry.
So here's a related question. Someone starts out with welcome to Boston.
Thank you.
And says that as a lifelong member of the community and was never really felt that Boston was an especially welcoming place. But with that said, wondering who you would most like to meet and include in your personal board of directors.
Boston. So probably the person that I got to briefly meet in my interview process that I would like to connect with again is Benny Wiley. I had taught the Harvard Business School case about the partnership. I believe in the partnership's mission about how do we create a more inclusive Boston and really elevate the African-American community and its leaders. So Benny Wiley is one of the people I definitely want to connect with.
All right, I'm putting this charge out to everybody who's listening. Let's make a connection here. What do you say? All right, so I have one more question that I want to ask you, and I'm just scrolling through to make sure I haven't missed anything. So here's a question about the wage gap and wondering about how we can make progress on kind of eliminating the wage gap, whether that's as employers or as individuals. What are your thoughts? Our
thoughts are we have to start from our young girls. We have to train them early on to think about their career and life work and have the confidence to do it. I'll give you one example. When I was senior associate dean at Michigan, I was able to raise money to ensure that women go into finance careers. And what we found is for women to be successful on Wall Street, they needed that confidence. And so we invested in practices, coaching to give them that confidence so that they could compete with their male counterpart. We need to do that early on. We need to direct young women to careers that are going to ensure that they are equitably paid. We need to challenge corporations to stop saying, I'm giving the man $5,000 more because he has a family and the woman doesn't need it. So our HR practices have to be important. And then something we talked about earlier, we need policy at the corporation level / organization and at the national level that ensures when women exit and enter the workplace for carrying responsibilities, that they're able to start their career and catch up with their male counterparts. And early on in my career, this was, something I studied, and it still weighs heavily for me as I coach my daughter and her friends and the next gen of leaders. But we have to do all of this. Look at countries in Europe that have the policies that support women as they enter and exit the workplace. So, and push your daughters, your nieces, your cousins to think about their career lifelong. I mean, I drive my daughter crazy, but I'm constantly saying, you need to do this, this, that to ensure that you can close that wage gap.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also direct people to the Boston Women's Workforce Council. They do a lot of work around wage equity in the Boston area. They've got a lot of good resources and are currently accepting applications for innovative practices. So definitely check them out, Boston Women's Workforce Council. All right, well, with that, I just want to say thank you so much. It has been a delight and a pleasure and a privilege, and look forward to many more conversations. I am going to turn things over to Celia.
Great. Thank you, Elisa. And thank you again, Dr. Wooten. I think I speak on behalf of all of us when I say, yes, welcome to Boston. We are thrilled to have you here as a part of our community. I know you talked about the ABCs of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think you also mentioned the word belonging. And I think of that sometimes as that fourth pillar. And it was woven throughout everything you said today. So I hope we all walk away with that in mind. And just thank you again. Thank you, Elisa. And thank you to all of you who are joining us today. Thank you again to our sponsor, PwC, for your support throughout the year. And we wish you all a wonderful day. Have a great one. Bye-bye.